Hi, I'm Bob Fisher, guest hosting for Dave Gilmore, and this is Design Intelligence. You'd be hard-pressed to find an architect or design professional who believes their clients understand and will pay for the true value of design. As part of our new series called Designing Value, we'll be talking to leading thinkers about how we define and communicate the value of design to provide actionable insights to apply in practice. Our guest today is Tyler Goss. Tyler is an architect and innovator with a diverse career with companies from WeWork to Disney Imagineering, and now as a VP and Global Digital Lead at AECOM. On this edition of This Is DesignIntelligence, he shares his unique background and what he's learned that informs his perspectives on the value proposition of design.
Welcome to this edition of This Is DesignIntelligence, conversations with leadership voices in the built environment.
Tyler Goss, welcome to This Is DesignIntelligence. Thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Bob. Appreciate it.
Well, I was really excited for this conversation because you have a really unique backstory and you have a lot of different perspectives with which to look at this central topic of the value of design. Tell us a little bit about where your perspective comes from, what your story is.
I trained as an architect. I've been a licensed architect for quite a while now, since 2010. But this all really stems back to an incident in grad school. I was in my second year of grad school, and for some reason, mental health or otherwise, I found it very difficult to justify any design decisions I was making based solely on my design intent. The way that I've always described this is I started to feel, what gives me the right to put this line here? What gives me the right to say that this corridor is here, that this room is here, that this program is here? And obviously, when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, there is nothing that really gives you the right other than the fact that you call yourself an architect and you say, my job here is to architect. But nevertheless, for me as a grad student, it was really difficult. And the way I got out of that hole was to start looking at, can I make value judgment? Can I start to empirically justify my moves, my planimetric moves, my section moves, my facade moves through some sort of quantitative financial basis? So this led me to do a lot of research in my second year on how the financial modeling happens in architecture, how pro formas are built, how speculative architecture is completed, what are some of the financials of even of our more civic architecture as well. And it got me out of a place where I couldn't draw anymore. And so for me, it's been foundational to my experience as an architect.
Was this something that you came to entirely on your own, or was there any kind of conversation in school and, among your fellow students or professors about this way of looking at the value of design?
There certainly were discussions. I recall this is back in, I'm going to date myself here. This is back in 2003, which seems like just yesterday, but it is actually 20 years ago. There were a lot of discussions of some of the ways that the au courant architects handled handled the praxis around intention. Obviously you have folks like Rem who just kind of, who create notional programmatic decisions from the intent of the users. You have someone like Peter Eisman who, with his indexing of the site, as he called it back then, to find some narrative that could be converted into form. But I don't know if this has changed much in architecture schools, but I don't think there was much emphasis on the financial or business end of architecture when I was at UCLA in 2002, 2003.
Okay, so first of all, where did this exploration lead you when you were in school? And then how did those ideas start to translate into the first place that you worked? So
as I went through the next few years, I started looking at program and form as it was outgrowth of the cost of building. So we had a studio. I think it was my third year. That was about the redevelopment of Los Angeles City Hall Park, sort of the long promenade park that moves from the LA DWP building all the way down to the LA City Hall. And part of this was a exploration of putting residential on that site. And so this is where I started really looking at the financials of residential and understanding, unit mix. And these are things that I was doing all on my own. It was not part of the brief at all, but I found myself really looking at a way of using the unit mix and the program to drive the form. And again, at the time, this is very heavily influenced by the ideas of Greg Lynn and the monad and the I forget the name of the theoretical house he proposed, which shifted and moved as program changed. But using this as a way to express program on the facade and using that, driving the building from the inside out, driving the building from the user. And this is really what that exploration and that project, in addition to obviously connections, because we always have connections in our industry, brought me to Shop Architects in New York. And I'll never forget going into my interview there. Shop at the time was doing a lot of work for a lot of speculative residential work, just off the heels of Porterhouse, one of their most famous early designs. And they were also doing a lot of work for large institutions like Goldman Sachs. And I remember as I'm talking to Greg Pasquarelli, his theory he laid out for me then was really interesting, which was that anyone can design an auditorium for Goldman Sachs at $2,000 a square foot, right? There's no bounds to what you can do. You can have jade inlays as they did. You can spend, $100 a square foot on carpet or even more. The entire auditorium was clad in bronze. It was a beautiful piece, but it was no challenge from a design perspective. And what Greg said to me then is, he's like, what I'm really interested in is how do we take the design and the ideas that we've done at Porterhouse and translate that for a larger audience? How do we democratize that? How do we make it so that everyone has access to this level of design that we're able to do here? And that really stuck with me. And that's why I took that job over the other things that were available in New York at the time, and immediately started working in the residential studio there, working on a 665 unit building in Washington, D.C. that was 20% inclusionary housing. And so again, having this thing being driven by program, it had to be driven by program because it was the pro forma was so tight that we had to be incredibly economical with how we laid out the units, how we thought about facade, how we thought about all of the other aspects of this building, and this, I think that Shop was the right place to be at the time because Shop was very interested in new financing models for architecture, right? It was interested in several of our projects there. We took an equity stake in the development in lieu of architectural fees, or in addition to architectural fees. And as a result, we had skin in the game, and we had to think about the pro forma, and we had to think about the value we were delivering, and we had to think about all the little design decisions that realtors and developers know by heart, but that we as architects don't tend to think about. As an example, there was a project which actually got built, 290 Mulberry House, which you can probably see it still on the Shop website. And when I was designing the penthouse apartment for that, and got really into actually discussing with potential customers or realtors and potential customers, how they thought about their morning routine, how they walked, how long they wanted to walk to the bathroom, how long they wanted to linger in their closet, picking out clothes, et cetera, et cetera. The result of those interviews and those questions was that what came out overwhelmingly is that people, one of the most valuable things in New York is the ability to stretch your legs and walk. And so we actually created a circuitous route so that it was a little bit longer. You had to leave the main area of the bedroom. You had to move down a hallway to the bathroom that was still part of the suite, and then you promenade through the bathroom all the way to the shower. Having the luxury of motion in New York was the thing that was seen as the valuable thing about the design. So we did that, and unfortunately, didn't sell right away because that was right at the start of the 2008 crash. But as far as I know, it's been a successful design since.
Yeah. So at Shop, every firm has to deal with this balance of practical considerations and practical ways or economic ways to look at value, right? Like looking at the pro forma and things, and then design decisions that are made for other reasons, right? And some of those may be experiential or aesthetic or whatever. How did Shop look at hitting that balance?
I don't think it's a balance, actually. I mean, I think that those moments of delight that you try to design into every project, those are, I mean, your aim is to delight the person who walks into the space or who uses the space or who owns the space. I'm using delight in a very broad sense here. And because of that, because that's the goal, delight is what the customer values, right? What he delights in or what they delight in is what they value. So I know it's a bit of a wide definition of value, but I think that any of those things, that the delight is the value in the design. Now, when you talk about the purely economical, the purely brass tacks economical concerns of it, those are boundary conditions, right? Those are we know what we have in terms of budget, in terms of capabilities of the trades in that area, in terms of what we believe to be the return on the investment, in the case of a speculative or speculative building. And the balance is trying to leverage design to create the most value inside of those boundaries, right? I mean, and at Shop, the way that we did that was by, and oftentimes developing ideas that allowed us to break down or just expand the edge of that boundary a little bit. And I'll give you an example of that. I mean, it's the very famous example, I think, from within Shop, which is the Porterhouse. So the Porterhouse is a adaptive reuse of a warehouse building in the meatpacking district in New York City. And the site was available for purchase. There was this number of developers competing for it. And the developer we ended up working with, they came to us to ask us for design decisions that would help him win the battle for the site, win the bidding for the site. And what we came up with in concert with Burrow Happold was a cantilever that extended the building 10 feet over the site next to it. Now, they bought the air rights. The air rights were available as part of this, so we were not impinging on that site at all. And because that was about 5 feet longer than than expected, we were able to create a huge amount of extra square footage very cheaply. It ended up being 300 square feet, I think, per floor for 6 floors. And that, at the time, those buildings were selling. The building was selling for $500 a square foot or $600 a square foot. So you could see how that money, how that finding that one design decision that allowed us to extend the building out further created all of this money out of thin air that then allowed the developer to bid more for the land and win the project. And then we won the project as well as a result of that.
Right. And so through this design decision, you were able to really enhance the financial value of the deal for the developer. So it sounds like a healthy way to look at this, or a way to keep financial or economic concerns from being seen as barriers to design, is this whole idea of parameters.
Well, they're soft boundaries, right? They're not barriers to design. If you start saying, and this is, again, I think where going back to my experience in grad school, seeing those barriers as hard, seeing those boundaries of cost, not value, but cost as hard, or seeing the capabilities of the trades as hard and fixed, you're not going to be able to create something new as a result.
Where did you wind up going after Shop?
So I briefly had my own practice in Vermont, but then the next big move was to Turner Construction. There is definitely a stigma still in this day and age about architects that go and work for construction management firms. It's not design in a traditional circumscribed sense. But again, we're talking about soft boundaries here, right? Mm-hmm. So what I saw at Turner, and what was, Jim Barrett, who became my boss and mentor, what he saw was there were incredibly interesting design decisions, not design of the building, but design of the process by which we built buildings that could be made in construction and would have outsized impact on, innovating the industry, making the construction industry more productive, building better buildings, et cetera. And this was around 2010. This is the time when every construction firm was building up and developing their BIM departments, right? Mm-hmm. So I went there to work to run the BIM department for Turner Construction. And again, that also comes right out of Shop, because mm-hmm. Shop was a very technically advanced firm, technically forward firm. We used a lot of new technologies or emerging technologies like generative components or Rhino and Grasshopper, Revit. At the time, these were all controversial departures from AutoCAD. And so having that BIM background, having that technological background allowed me to make the jump into construction technology at Turner. Mm-hmm. And so when I'm talking about design decisions or designing a process as opposed to designing a building, I'll give you an example again. World Trade Center Tower 2 was a Turner Construction project. And we had produced from the 2D drawing set that the architect had built. We produced 3D models, and we went ahead and ran interference checking, clash detection on them, mm-hmm. found on the order of 40,000 clashes per floor based on the drawing set that was produced by the architects. Wow. And of course, this is the classic conundrum of drawing in 2D, is that you have no chance to, your visualization of the 3D space is happening only in your head, and therefore it's somewhat fallible. Like mm-hmm. the architect has to translate their 3D ideas into 2D and make sure that everything is correct and everything is nestled correctly. And then of course you have all the other trades that have to put all their work in there as well. And so we realized, because of the scale of the clash in this building, that we were never going to get out of the ground if we didn't change the process by which we mm-hmm. Reviewed and resolved those clashes. So this is when we developed, at the time, the way that clash detection was done and clash and interference resolution was done. Well, one, it was done on a light table with Mylars, 2D Mylars, which took forever and was quite fallible. We had just started to crack the code on 3D clash detection at Yankee Stadium. And the way that we did it there, and the way that it was becoming the standard process for doing this, was that you would meet once a week, you would tell everyone what their clashes were, they would go and work to resolve them, and then they'd come back the next week and you do it all over again. And the problem with this was that these folks were working in a vacuum, right? So they would go for a week and try to resolve their stuff, and they'd come back and they may have resolved 500 clashes, but they had created 300 more. So this is one of those 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of situations. And it was too slow to meet the schedule that we had for the trade center. So what we did, we did a design intervention. We said, okay, if the problem is that these people are working in a vacuum, let's put them all in a room together. Let's create a big room. Luckily, we had a big room. There was a great space in 7 World Trade that we were allowed to use. It was a former law firm. So I had, 7 trades draftsmen sitting around a massive, massive law office conference table for roughly 2 months. And we resolved all of that work. We got through 4 stories of the sub basement where all of the mechanicals were, and we got out of the ground on schedule. And this became the de facto way in which we would do clash detection, trade coordination at Turner Construction, or at least the way that I built it out in our New York office, and the way that we built it for the San Francisco office, the Oakland office I subsequently came out here to manage.
So there's a really interesting set of lenses that you could look at design value through that are illustrated by the stories that you've told from both Shop and Turner. One of them is looking through the lens of the object, right? Looking at the lens of the building that you're designing. The second is looking through the lens of process. How is it that you can improve the process to, better preserve design intent, make the process less wasteful, and make the process more economical? And then there's this other element that's entering into the story about new technologies and how those are able to enhance or even change the value proposition for design. Am I picking up, relevant threads from what you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. You're probably weaving the story of my career better than I can. Yeah, I mean, the technology is an interesting one because the goal of technology is ultimately in our industry is process efficiency, right? So it does serve process, and or at least that's one of the goals, and it does serve design as well. If I start to think about it, in earnest here, because it allows you some of the new technologies, the NURBS-based technologies, or surface modelers allowed us to do form in a way that we hadn't been able to do form before. I think the classic example of that in the industry is Frank Gehry's use of CATIA as in the development of both Bilbao and the Disney Concert Hall. Mm-hmm. But for me, the interesting thing with technology is that as an industry, technology is constantly expanding on soft boundaries, right? They're constantly finding ways. And yes, some of those ways are, skirting regulation or labor arbitrage, which are things I wouldn't necessarily want to do myself. But there have been some really astounding and interesting, developments. And I think we all today give Revit a hard time because it's old and it's clunky. And people still believe it's slower than drawing by hand or drawing in AutoCAD. And in some cases that is true. But, at the time when we first started using it at Shop in 2007, it was a revelation, right? It was allowed us to do things that we couldn't have done before. We were designing a building at 30th and 10th Street in New York, a residential building in the Highline corridor. And so the Highline corridor had the zoning regulations in the Highline corridor were drawn up relatively recently at this point, in 2007. And they were also somewhat inconsistent. And so we found an interpretation in there that allowed us 12 FAR, so 12 times the lot size that we could build in terms of square footage. And we had designed based on that interpretation. And while we were petitioning the city to see if they agreed with our interpretation, and wouldn't you know it, they said, well, no, actually, you're only allowed 9.5 FAR. So we had a 40-story building we designed, and we had to take it down to 30 stories over the course of a weekend and re-detail it, redraw it. This was when we were in design development even. And Revit allowed us the ability to make that change with very little marginal cost. And we also looked like heroes to the customer, right? Because we came in and we solved it over the course of a weekend, as architects are often wont to do. So that, or Revit or Navisworks allowing us to clash in 3D. Some of the more interesting technologies that are out there now are around really like bringing AI and into the computational design space, like Hypar or Victor, which are doing very interesting things with computational design outside of the platforms, outside of Revit and Dynamo. And then just, all of the project management and process management tools that have emerged, or the construction management tools like the structured site or open space. These are all tools that extend the capacity of your architect or engineer or construction manager to do their work.
So it seems like as we're going through your story that you're kind of adding these different dimensions of understanding around the value of design, right? What you can do with the building itself, what you can do with the process, what you can do through the technology to enhance many different levels of design, right? Or enhance many different ways that value can be perceived, whether it's through the building user, from the developer, or some other interested party. So from your time at Shop and at Turner Construction was the next place that you went Disney?
No, actually, I spent a couple of I actually had a couple of different places I went during that time. I think most of the folks in the industry are aware of Case Design, which was a BIM consultancy, BIM and business process consultancy that founded by Dave Fano, Steve Sanderson, and Federico Negro to develop technology solutions for the industry. And so, that was sort of extending that technological thread that we all had started at Shop together. From there, Case was sold to WeWork. WeWork was a very interesting place. I have plenty of things I could say about that, but I was really only there for 3 months, and I don't feel like it's not my place to say. People have spoken much more eloquently on WeWork and its troubles and victories as well. But from there, I spent some time at Turner working directly in our innovation and technology group, just trying to find new solutions for the construction industry. And then from there, I went to Disney Imagineering, which, frankly, Disney Imagineering was far and away one of the most interesting places I've ever worked or ever experienced. Imagine an industry, imagine a business where the people you work with are the absolute best in the world at what they do. Not, top tier, no, the best. I mean, Disney Imagineering is made up of over 100 different disciplines, and the people who work in rides, ride engineering, ride controls, show engineering, show controls, show lighting, the animatronics. If you want a job in those places, if that's your passion in life, that's where you go. And I got to work with these people every day, which was just absolutely amazing. And so what I was there to do was to manage the construction technology pipeline. So all of the technology we used to deliver on these massive, massive projects, that was my responsibility to make sure all that stuff worked, and all of the and we built, connective tissue to stitch all of these different software platforms together. But the really interesting thing about Disney is how they thought about value, because of course they're a business, right? The reason we build theme parks and theme attractions is to make money, and it's very, very. I mean, it's an elaborate and complex financial system inside of Disney because it's a huge company. But at the end of the day, it's very simple to bottom line what the value of design is there, because they make it very easy, because there's a lot of effort that has gone into studying and modeling that. And the reason for that is the reason that all that effort is done to study and model the financial impact of design decisions is because Disney has a lot of money, and choosing where to invest that money to get the best return is the bread and butter of how that company has survived for 100 years. So either, you can if you have $1 billion, you can either invest it in 4 or 5 Marvel movies, or you can build a theme park attraction, a theme park land. So as a result, you found the Imagineering team in constant competition with all of the other ways in which Disney can make money, all of the other ways, and oftentimes much more profitable ways that they can make money. So at Disney, it also wasn't just about the financials. It wasn't about, okay, if we produce this ride, we'll have 30,000 people per hour going through it, which means this much revenue for the company. Disney actually has developed the concept of an excellent experience, right? So you're only measuring based on the number of excellent experiences we deliver as Imagineers. You're not measuring off of how many times someone goes through the rides. You're measuring how many times someone goes through the ride and has a great time. And this is done through surveys and a lot of other financial modeling. But the company actually knows what the value of an excellent experience on an e-ticket attraction is, in terms of what revenue that will bring in for the company.
So it sounds like at Disney, they added yet another kind of layer or dimension to this whole question of design value. It sounds like they were really focused on experience, and that they found some interesting ways to be able to quantify that were outside of just simply financial.
Yes. Yeah. And so it allows you to take that qualitative experience and bring it into a financial justification in a way that everyone agreed was proper and responsible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So and this thinking underlies every design decision that's made there. Whether to how to invest in animatronics, what ride vehicle to use, how to skin the ride, what's the IP we're going to use. All of these decisions are based on, we think this is going to give the best experience. So these are all design decisions that are driving a customer being happy at the happiest place on earth, and tying it back to, in a relatively simple way, a simple mathematical way, back to the business of the company. And I thought that was brilliant, because it's sort of what I had been working towards in my own research and my own efforts on the idea of the value of design from the very beginning of my career. I mean, going all the way back to grad school.
Well, it sounds like if you think about that moment that you had in graduate school where you were questioning, how can I make these decisions? Another way to look at that is, what value am I bringing by making these decisions? And it sounds like at each stage in your career, you added more and more dimensions of how your decision-making, whether it was process-based, whether it was technology-based, whether it was using the Disney model of experience, whether it was, focusing on the parameters of a building, that you were able to kind of add and add and add to the ways that design decisions can create value.
Yeah, I mean, look, the fundamental value proposition of an architect is to draw a line on a piece of paper and say, the space on this side of the line means this thing, and the space on the other side of the line means something else. That's really what architects do all day long. And ascribing that, that you could build up any sort of theory or basis of your design philosophy from that fundamental premise, but it always goes back to that first principle. And for me, I took the track of, I need to make a value-based decision that's independent of myself and my ideas as an artist or an architect, that are really driven by what the customer of the building needs to create spaces that have value to them. And so at Chop, that was creating lovely and very interesting residential buildings. At Turner, my customer were the trades that worked for us. So I wanted to make their process as easy and fluid as possible. And then obviously at Disney, the customer is the theme park visitor, theme park guest. And so making their experience as enjoyable or as happy as possible was the guiding principle of all that work that was done. And ultimately at Disney, more often my customers were internal Imagineers. So I tried to extend that same level of guest experience to their, to the systems and tools that they used on a daily basis to build the theme parks.
So you taught for Design Intelligence in the Learning Institute, and you taught about the value of design. Were all of these ideas part of what you told the emerging leaders who were part of that program? Absolutely.
I mean, I believe very strongly in all of the, in the philosophy, design philosophy I've built up over the course of the past 2 decades. It was a really interesting conversation that we've had at the Learning Institute. Interesting conversation with the firm that we were teaching. It's interesting, and I think one of the things that really brings value with the Learning Institute is the diversity of perspectives that are on offer. I mean, it's seldom that someone with a career as eclectic and varied as mine gets a chance to talk to architects about design. I get to talk to them and help reframe for them what the value of their design work is. And I think we, of course, in every business, in every job or every company that we work for, you have a tendency to, you get caught in different scales, and you get caught too close to the work. You can't see the big picture. You get caught in the big picture and you can't work out the details. And what I really enjoyed about teaching that course was the ability to move scales, to reground the company's perception of what their value was, and to, ultimately, I think, hopefully, to change how they think about design, change how they think about the way that they work. I mean, there's nothing that makes you happier as a teacher than to see your ideas put into practice.
Well, and to see perhaps people who you're trying to work with expanding the parameters of how they look at the value of design in this case.
Pushing on those soft boundaries again. Yeah,
absolutely. So let's start to bring this back to your day-to-day life now. So after Imagineering, where did you go?
So I'm now at AECOM, where I'm the VP and Global Digital Lead for water. So I support all of our water infrastructure business with digital tools, digital consulting offerings, and digital products that we are actually building and selling as SaaS services. And so, I mean, the reason that I chose to go to AECOM, again, was a moral and ethical one. I mean, I came out of Disney having produced Joy. That was ultimately the product at Disney, and it's hard to argue with that from an ethical standpoint, although I think a lot of people do with Disney in the way that they gatekeep that joy. But the idea of working in water, which is ultimately the most important thing on this planet, and has been really eye-opening to me, the way that this industry thinks about its responsibility to the planet, to the people it serves, is, it's an extension. It's a continuation of how Disney thinks about its guests. So what we've been doing recently is, a lot of the work that we did at Disney, a lot of the work that I did at Disney, which is to build tools and software that make my coworkers' lives easier. So we're building a lot of design automation tools to help automate the process of engineering wastewater treatment plants. And pipe networks and things like that. It's also an opportunity to build out software that takes the engineering expertise of AECOM and opens it up to a larger audience, creates more value in the world, because instead of having to buy hours from AECOM, which are expensive, you can buy software from AECOM that helps you do the same thing as our engineering expertise would be. And one of my favorite examples of that is the new platform that we've built called Pipe Insights, which is a AI-based machine vision tool for sewer inspection. Now, this is a process that historically, the historical way of doing it is you take a little camera that's on a dolly, you drop it into a sewer, you drive it down the sewer, and as you're driving it down, you have an operator in a truck that's sitting in the middle of traffic, marking out every single defect in that sewer. And what we've done instead is now you can just go and you can throw a robot in the sewer. It can crawl its way through the sewer. And then on the other end, you drop that video into the Pipe Insights AI engine, and it will identify and code over 280 different types of defects that in the North American market. And so this takes thousands of years of engineering expertise that have been imparted into, I think we had 25 different engineers who were trained and certified inspectors that were training the AI vision model to recognize all these things. And so now you get access to that AECOM expertise, but you only have to pay a software price for it. And to me, that's the biggest victory, is building out tools that make it so that we're not just working with the LADWPs or the SFPUCs of the world, these big cities, but we can offer the same level of service to municipalities with maybe 500 subscribers. For me, that's the goal at AECOM, is to get our expertise, democratize it out so that everyone who needs that expertise can get it at a price that they can afford.
And all facilitated by new technologies and maybe some design thinking.
Absolutely.
Well, Tyler, it's been fantastic to hear this incredibly varied and rich career path that you've been on, and all the different ways that you have learned to, expand upon the value of design and the way that you look at it. Just really appreciate you coming into This Is Design Intelligence and sharing your story with our audience.
Well, thanks, Bob. This has been a lot of fun. And look, this is what I love about design intelligence, the ability to dive deeply into things that matter to me and hopefully matter to your audience. and really move the needle on how we think about the future of this industry.
Well, really appreciate it. It was great to talk to you.
Thanks. Anytime.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of This Is Design Intelligence. The producer is Laura Spells. The sound engineer is Jared Knable. This has been a DI Media Group production.